So I wanted to start out with a question that may not be a question you expect in church, but don't worry, it's not too bad. What's your favorite sport? Like, what do you like to watch? Like, what's that thing you look forward to actually watching on TV or in person? You know, and because even if you're not a sports person, right, watching people who are good at athletics, whatever it might be, is actually entertaining. I mean, that's the reason that the Olympics tend to be so popular. There are tons of sports in the Olympics that I absolutely do not understand. But watching people who are really good at something do it is entertaining. Now, for me, if you were to ask me that question, many of you know what my answer would be. Pro football. And so my year gets better this time of year every year because pro football returns. And it's kind of funny because through most of my life, I was a moderate football fan. I wasn't like super into it. I enjoyed it. But then at some point, I became a big fan. And I really, really enjoy it. And it's kind of these kind of circumstances that come together that kind of set these things up. That, you know, for me, Brian and I moved to a new area. And when you move to a new area, you get a new home team. So in my case, you know, I moved to this new area. And as I arrive, it happens to correspond with a particular player's rookie season. And this rookie, no one has any real expectations for him. But over the years, this rookie gets better and better, and his team gets better and better, and he ends up doing pretty well. You may have heard of him. His name is Tom Brady. So it turns out that Bon and I actually moved to New Hampshire in the year 2000, which is Tom Brady's rookie season. And so we got to watch that kind of rise of the Patriots with Tom Brady. And, you know, and I've kind of grown to be such a fan that thanks to things like NFL Plus, I can actually watch him in Tampa Bay as easily as I can watch him here with the Patriots. No boos, hisses, nothing, really. Nobody cares. Is that where we're at? This is a nobody cares about football group. Is that what we're talking about here? Don't worry, I'm going to move on from football. This is all just the setup. Stay with me. Stay with me. So the thing that's kind of interesting, right, is that Tom Brady ultimately becomes largely the undisputed best quarterback in history. Right? Been in 10 Super Bowls, won 7 of them. He's won twice as many Super Bowls as his nearest match, sort of thing. And the thing that's kind of interesting is that when someone is a superstar like that, when someone's life is kind of so different from the rest of us, we tend to think that their lives are kind of perfect, right? When you've kind of got that kind of money, that kind of fame, right? Everything must just be fine, right? There's no issues. It's all just fine. But of course, we know that's not true, right? That people are people, no matter what your status in life, no matter what your economic situation, no matter what your, popularity. There are some things about life that impact all of us. And if you follow the news at all, you know that over the past couple weeks, that's been true of Tom Brady. That a guy who has done a really good job of over 20 plus years of keeping his personal life completely out of the news. Suddenly, there's reports out there of him having trouble in his marriage. Now, I want to be really careful. I'm not looking to spread gossip or get into the gossip side of this at all. The reason that I bring it up is because the reason that's given for the challenges he's facing is very relatable. Now, at first, it won't sound like it, though. This all ties back to him retiring last year. That last year, after 22 seasons in the NFL, the winningest quarterback in history, he actually finished the season as the number 1 rated quarterback in the league. At 44 years old, he retires. And people didn't really expect him to retire yet. But then a month later, he unretired, and he came back. And at first there was a lot of speculation that he's just such a competitor that he just couldn't stand to be away from the game, and who knows? Who knows what that is? But here's where the challenge comes in. And here's the thing that I think we can all relate to. That retirement process has led to conflict in his marriage, or at least that's what's reported. Because here's how the process is reported to have gone. That as he approached the end of the season, he and his wife sat down, talked about it. It's been a great run, but you've got a family, you've got other considerations. It's time to retire. And the reporting is that they agreed that it was time to retire. But then about 30 days later, when he unretired, the reports are he didn't tell her. He just came back. Now, obviously, at some point, she knew. When Tom Brady comes out of retirement, we all know, sort of thing. And I think the thing is that, again, not getting into the gossip of it. But the thing is that what happened there, who has not known a man who's done something exactly like that? Right? I assume women do it too. I just witness it in men much more, actually. But you have this whole conversation, you decide what you're going to do. And then you kind of change your mind. And it's funny because on the surface, it's like, well, it's his life, right? It's his life. If he wants to unretire, he can unretire. Why does he have to talk to anybody about it? Well, it's his family. So the decisions he makes impact his whole family. I mean, first of all, his notorious incompetitiveness means that for half the year or more, he's not home. So that's going to affect his family. He's playing in the NFL where guys get crippling injuries, and he's 45 years old now. If that happens, that's going to affect his family. He made the decision alone, or at least that's what's reported, but his whole family has to live with the outcome of that decision. And I think that's the thing that we can kind of grab onto in this, is that when we make decisions, we have to recognize that we are never making those decisions in a vacuum. The decisions that we make affect other people. They affect our families. They affect the other people we interact with. Sometimes they even affect people we don't directly have relationships with, but somehow they're impacted by those decisions as well. And so whenever we're making a decision, we need to consider who it's going to affect. And we need to actually consult those people, right? Talk to those people. Now, it doesn't mean that other people get to decide what we do, but I think there's this tendency that when we need to make a decision, there are certain people we know are not going to say to us the things we want to hear. And so we just don't talk to them. But anyway, I want to kick off a new series today, The Choices We Make. And so the point of the series is that when we make decisions, when we make choices in our life, oftentimes there are not so obvious implications to those choices. And I want to kick off today with collateral damage. How our decisions affect other people. Because we have a tendency to miss that, to recognize, or to not recognize that we never make our decisions in a vacuum. Virtually every decision we make affects other people, and we need to consider that. But there's also something else we have to balance. We can also do that too much. If we're not careful, we'll become people pleasers. And we never make clear decisions. We're always trying to guess what other people want us to do, and we're just trying to kind of, well, if I do this, will this person be happy? If I do this, will that person be happy? And that's no way to decide things either. The process, I think, needs to be that we need to consider all of the information. And other people's opinions are information, as long as a person has a right to speak into your life, sort of thing, people who are close to you. But you have to weight it like all information. It is important, but so are the possible outcomes. Those are important as well. And we have to balance all those decisions. Now, I think that most of us want to make good decisions in life. I mean, I can't imagine waking up in the morning going, I'm going to make as many bad decisions today as I can. There are days in my life that look like I did that, but that is never the goal when the day starts. But I think something gets a hold of us, and that's our emotions. That in situations, our emotions just kind of grab onto us, and we make very quick decisions. Sometimes we make quick decisions because we don't want to hear what other people have to say. Sometimes we make quick decisions just because we get excited, we get caught up in it. It's kind of something I really like the idea of, and I'm just going to, I'm going to buy that thing. It's going to be so cool. Yeah, I've never worked out before, but when I buy a treadmill this time, I'm going to use it every day, sort of thing. Or sometimes things are just uncomfortable, and we just want to be done with it. And we'll just make any decision we can make to just be done with it. And any kind of impulsive decision, no matter what drives the impulse, generally emotion, is likely to have unintended consequences and may impact people we care about. So as we go through this actually throughout this whole series, we're going to look at a guy from the Old Testament that you may have heard of. Not quite as popular as Tom Brady, but he's pretty popular. A guy named Samson. Now, you've probably heard of Samson. There's probably a few things you know about him. You know, he was notoriously strong. You know, he was an incredibly effective warrior. He had this really messed up relationship with this girl named Delilah. Now, we're not going to talk about Delilah today. We'll talk about her next week. But there are other things we know about Samson. Something you may not know. Samson is considered one of the Old Testament judges. Remember, we talked about judges last week. A judge in the Old Testament is not someone who sits in the court and makes legal rulings. In the Old Testament, someone who is a judge is someone who probably was charismatic, or at least became charismatic, and becomes a defender of his people. Now, last week we talked a lot about Gideon. Gideon was a defender of his people. Well, Samson is probably the most famous judge. So famous that even people who don't know what a judge is probably know about Samson. And what we may lose track of is that in the time frame that he lived in the region where he lived, he's not just some random guy. He's probably really well known because he's the guy who showed up and dealt with things. In a hostile, physical, brutal world, he was the guy who showed up and dealt with problems. So he'd be famous like an athlete. Now, he wouldn't have the same scale as a professional athlete today, but the people in the region would know who he was. That would also mean he would probably lead a life of somewhat privilege. The people would probably generally give him whatever he wants. Now, there's a common theme throughout the book of Judges, and we saw this last week with Gideon. When we look at the judges, the thing they're commonly dealing with is foreign invaders. The invaders have come in, and the judge is dealing with that issue. Now, Samson, being a judge, has to deal with invaders, but these are different invaders than Gideon dealt with. Samson's dealing with the Philistines. And the Philistine invasion is very different from Gideon's. Where Gideon's was this kind of assault and just kind of destroy things and so forth, the Philistines are more like occupiers. They kind of move into the region, they're in charge, but they allow the people who lived there before, Samson's people, to largely go on about their lives as long as they don't forget their place. That the Philistines are in charge, Samson's people are not. And it turns out that they even kind of interact with one another. So they can actually have conversations. There would always be this kind of underlying hostility, but they can interact with one another. So now as we meet Samson, Samson is a young man. And as we will see, Samson has an issue. He has virtually no impulse control. Whatever he wants to do, he does it. So although he is a capable defender of his people, his decisions are driven almost entirely by what he wants, without regard for anyone else. So as we meet Samson, he's a young man, and he's traveling between his home city and another city called Timnah, which is about 4 miles or so from where he lives. And so we're told, Samson went down to Timnah and saw there a young Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, "I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife." You see a little bit about his personality at that point. Should you be talking to your parents that way? Probably not. I'm not saying you don't. I'm just saying you probably shouldn't be talking to your parents that way. So he kind of just makes this demand on his parents. And it's kind of interesting because he's kind of following the cultural norms, but not really. Because in the culture, parents arranged marriages for their children. But part of arranging a marriage was not just the administrative work. It was actually picking someone they thought was a good mate for you and kind of bringing you together. And then as part of that, doing the actual arrangement of the marriage itself. So it's kind of a matchmaker all the way through arranging the marriage. Basically, Samson doesn't want it that way. Samson has picked his wife and basically says to his parents, set it up, make it happen. Now, his parents, having some sense of sense, look at this situation and go, this is going to be a terrible situation. These are the people who have conquered our nation, and you want to marry them? Isn't there a nice girl around here somewhere that you'd kind of like to spend some time with instead? Because it is kind of, you're Samson. You can have anybody you want. But in spite of the fact that they push back and point out that this is a dangerous situation, but Samson said to his father, get her for me. She's the right one for me. Now, as you read that, you kind of go, oh, wait a minute. I know what this is. This is like a Romeo and Juliet thing. Right? It's kind of the family say this relationship is wrong. The culture says this relationship is wrong, but they've fallen in love, right? And they are madly in love. And his parents just don't understand. That must be what's happening here. Right? It's a romantic love story, and they're going to overcome opposition. Until you read on, and we discover something. It says that Samson went down to Timnah together with his father and mother. Then Samson went down and talked with the woman, and he liked her. He had never spoken to her. He demands this marriage that is an incredibly dangerous, volatile situation. Never talked to her. Why did he want to marry her? Because she's hot. That's it. That is it. He didn't know her, never spoken to her, but he liked what he saw. Now, the impact and the danger of this situation is hard for us to even imagine. Right? This is a place where you don't take prisoners of war. If you get into a battle, you kill each other. That's how things work. And he's now putting himself in danger, although he can probably handle it. He's Samson, right? He's putting his family in danger. He's putting the people he's responsible to care for and defend in danger. Why? Because she's gorgeous and she's exotic. And we'll see over time that for Samson, this gorgeous exotic woman thing is a chronic downfall for him. But he doesn't care because he has his own way of making decisions. His way of making decisions works something like this. He goes along, he sees her, she's gorgeous, she's hot, she's exotic. I want it. But then maybe someone points out and says that, well, gosh, is this really the sort of thing you want to do? But you start justifying. I'm Samson. I'm working all the time. I'm caring for everybody around here. I want it and I deserve it. Look at all the things I do. How much I give to other people. Can't I have what I want sometimes? And someone would go along and point out and saying that, well, if you do this, you may get killed. You may get her killed. Maybe you'll get people you're responsible to care for killed. And he's like, I can handle it. Now, I want it. I deserve it. I can handle it. Ever done that? Ever look at any situation, something you want, and you start to think about the issues? I want to do this. It's not really a good decision. But you know what? I've been working really hard all week. I can handle it this one time. What's the big deal? And then you go, you know what? Because I've been working so hard, I deserve it. And you know what? I know it's dangerous, but it's just once. I'm just going to make this crazy purchase once, or I'm just going to do this thing once, or I'm just going to, I got to go to work tomorrow, but I can stay out till 4 a.m. once. It's fine. I want it. I can deserve it. I deserve it. I can handle it. Now, for Samson, again, maybe he could handle it, but I don't know that most of us can. I think that if we're in a situation where this is our rationale, okay, the fact that we start doing this tells us that it's probably not a good choice. That if you have to talk yourself into it using that mechanism, we probably want to think about that. And as we'll see as we walk along with Samson here, this decision he makes using this decision process begins a very dangerous downward spiral that many of the people he cares about will end up paying for. So his parents do give in. They do arrange the marriage. And so they travel back to Timnah to actually have the marriage celebration. And when they talk about a marriage celebration, it's a party. It's a 7-day party. And what's interesting is that if you read your Bible, like the NIV, which is probably one of the more popular ones, it says that they throw a feast. The word that's translated as feast means lots of food and lots of drinking. So Samson is about to go into the land of the conquerors, spend 7 days drinking. Nothing bad could happen there, right? Nothing. Now, the thing is that normally a groom would have a large entourage with him, but it doesn't seem that Samson has many friends because he seems to show up with just his parents and himself. So the Philistines give him an entourage. They give him a 30-person entourage. So now they're going to be doing 7 days drinking with 30 other young men, probably warriors, hanging out with him. So if you're kind of, using a bit of sense, 7 days of drinking, hanging out with the enemy, the smart thing to do would be just kind of keep it cool, right? Keep your head down, just get through this ceremony, be pleasant to everyone, but don't do anything stupid. But that's not how Samson rolls, right? Samson decides that he's going to make an over-the-top bet with his 30 men there, his entourage. Because he says, let me tell you a riddle. If you can give me the answer within the 7 days of the feast, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. If you can't tell me the answer, you must give me 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. Now, it's hard for us to recognize the scale of this wager, because clothing is pretty prevalent for us. But in that time, clothing was expensive. Pretty much everything was made for the person who was wearing it. And the clothing being described here is expensive clothing, because it would be these kind of long linen undergarments underneath, then a kind of a dressy robe over, the kind of thing an important person wears. So what's driving Samson's decision? I want to look like an important person. I want that Gucci bag, right? I want that Hugo Boss suit sort of thing. That's the equivalent here. And I don't want just one, I want 30. And that will show everyone how important I am. Now, there's a ton of problems with this bet. I mean, largely, if he loses, there's no way he can pay for this. And also think about the scale. It's 1 and 30. If he wins, each of those 30 have to buy one outfit, which would still be very expensive. But if Samson wins, what's he have to do? Buy 30 outfits, and one is more money than he has. But what do you think his process is? I want it. I want those clothes that make me look like the important person I am. And also, I know these Philistines look down on me, and I'm going to show them that I'm superior. But, I deserve it too, because, I defend people all the time. And I'm here with these people. I'm important. I should look like I'm important. And I deserve to be recognized as being as smart or smarter than they are. But wait a minute, Samson, you might get a bunch of people killed here. Or if you lose, you can't pay for it. I can handle it. I got this. Not a problem. Now, of course, he kind of rigs this game a little bit. He asks them a riddle that there is probably no way they can actually answer. He actually puts together a riddle based on a very personal experience he had while traveling. But now, here's the issue. Once they realize, the 30 men realize that he has dragged them into a game they can't win, because it's not a classic riddle, it's not a figure it out riddle. You have to know things they're not going to know. They're furious, because now basically this Samson guy has shown up in our town, making us look like fools, trying to steal our money. They don't take it well. Now they know that if they try to physically go up against Samson, they are not likely to win. So what do? They go to someone close to him, the girl he's about to marry. And they basically make accusations against her. Did you do this on purpose? Did you bring this guy in here to make us look like fools? Did you bring him here to steal from us? Either you get the answer or you're going to pay. So then she goes to Samson, just kind of casually asks him, what's the answer to the riddle? And he kind of knows what's going on, so he doesn't answer. So what ends up happening the last several days of the festival, rather than enjoying themselves, she is constantly crying and begging Samson for the answer. So they're both paying for this kind of silly decision that he's made. And finally, on the final day, he gives in. And he tells her the answer. What does she do? She tells them the answer. So they walk up to Samson, tell him the answer, and Samson loses the bet. He can't pay it. There's no way he can pay it. So now the dangers of his initial decision are beginning to show up. That one bad decision that he made in the very beginning of our story, things are starting to crumble now. Because now he has to come up with 30 outfits. Again, he couldn't afford to buy one of them. But if he doesn't pay off the bet, he's going to look like a fool. So he uses what he has, his physical prowess. He travels 20 miles away to another Philistine city where no one knows him, or at least no one knows what's going on back where he was at. He attacks 30 men, steals their clothes, packs it up, brings it back, pays his debt. See, I'm good. Now, of course, he doesn't feel good at this point, but he has paid his debts, so he disappears. Well, wasn't he here to marry this girl? And he's gone. He's left her effectively standing at the altar alone. And in that culture, that would have been shame for her. That would have made her look really bad. So to deal with that, her father quickly marries her off to someone else, because in that culture, he could do that. And so later, Samson decides he wants to be with his wife, shows up, she's married to somebody else now. How do you think Samson handled that? Not happy. Not happy. Samson, being Samson, is furious. So what he does is he decides that he's going to get even. You may notice that sometimes Samson's behavior is a little out of scale. Right? So his wife-to-be got married off. The way he evens the scales, he burns all their fields, all their vineyards, and all their orchards. Basically, he's just taken all their food. Philistines didn't take that well. They know they can't go up against him. What do? They go over to her house and kill her and her father. All this stems from Samson's decision. So what's the net result of that decision? Samson's still alone, but he lost the girl. 30 strangers lost their clothes. The people of Timnah lost their food. And the girl and her father lost their lives. Now, interestingly, Samson is still largely okay. He's kind of right back where he started. I'm alone. I'm okay. It's been a bit of an emotional roller coaster, but I'm okay. He came out fine, but look how much everyone else had to pay for his decision. That impulsive decision he made without considering its effects. Now, we might be tempted to step in here and defend Samson. I mean, it's like, come on, he married her. How could he know all that stuff was going to happen? And you're right. He probably couldn't have known the specifics of what was going to happen, but he should have known something was going to happen. And that's the thing that we often kind of experience in life, is that when we make a decision that is questionable and we disregard good advice, and it blows up bigger than we expected, our defense is, how could I know that was going to happen? And maybe you couldn't know that was going to happen. But I think we have to recognize that some decisions are likely to have bad outcomes, even if you can't guess what they are. And I think the key way to avoid that is to avoid the Samson decision-making process. I want it. I deserve it. I can handle it. Now, I keep labeling this the Samson decision process, but I could also label it the Jim decision process at times. And I bet I could go around and we've all made choices like that sometimes. And my point in saying that is not to condemn any one of us. First of all, it's to recognize that it's part of humanity. We get drawn into things, we get excited, and we step into things and justify them along the way. Or we get into things and we know that people are going to give us advice that we don't want to hear. So we just don't talk to them about it. You might raise a good point that I don't want to hear. I'm not going to talk to you about it. And what we want to do is be willing to face the challenges. To first of all, be honest with ourselves about why we're choosing to do something. Be honest with ourselves about what sort of things might come out of this. Even if we don't know specifically what might come out of it, Is something good likely to come out of this decision, or is there a greater probability that something bad is going to come out of this decision? And be willing to seek counsel, right? To talk to people around you that you trust. But again, it's always a balancing act. Because it is important to talk to people around you that you trust, but never make your decisions for someone else. We have to recognize that advice and counsel is just another data point. You know, if you trust someone, that's a very valuable data point. But you got to think across the whole spectrum, right? If we try to live as people pleasers, we're going to be depressed and unhappy. But if we ignore counsel at the same time, that's probably going to lead to bad outcomes. And like so much of life, the best choice runs down the middle, right? That you hear other people's input, you consider the input, you also use your own sense and your own reason, and you balance all those things out. There are some really good decisions that might be unpopular decisions. You know, when I moved to New York City, my mother and father were furious with me. I was fairly young at the time. But I had a job. It wasn't like I ran off, to be an actor or something. Not that acting is bad. Sorry, I shouldn't do that. No, I did something honorable. I worked for a brokerage company. There you go. Something highly honorable there. But my parents were furious with me. My mom would barely talk to me. But it was the right decision for me. That was a good career move for me. I'd done all the responsible things to set it up. It doesn't mean I didn't make mistakes, sort of thing. But you have to balance that out. But I wouldn't have moved there without at least telling her, sort of thing, right? And so that's the things we just want to kind of balance out. That some things in life, most things in life, are not black and white. And as we make our decisions, it's always balancing out the scales of gray, using the evidence you have, the things you can do to make the most difference you can, to do the things that are the best choices, hearing the people around you, but not being dictated by the opinions of people around us.